Last year, in one of the more talked about moments leading up to the election, David McCraw, the New York Times Deputy General Counsel, penned a response to the threat of a libel suit. And if you remember the incident, it went viral. I don't know how many legal briefs have gone viral. You compete with all those kitten videos and, you know, you're running a big risk. And I doubt he intended, actually, that it would get the attention that it did. But in his letter, he firmly stood in defense not only of the Times, but the free press and the right to publish truthful information. So we are delighted to have him here tonight. Please join me in welcoming David McCraw.
Before I begin, let me get one thing straight with you all. I know some of you are already signing on to Twitter and posting an aerial shot of tonight's dinner in a totally dishonest and totally lame attempt to prove that this crowd is not as big as the crowd at the Reporters Committee during the Obama administration. Hashtag pathetic, hashtag dishonest, hashtag I hate Jim Comey too. Believe me, I have asked the foremost expert on crowd size in the country, in the world, in the universe maybe, I don't know. And Sean Spicer has assured me that there is no question this is the largest, hugest, bigliest crowd ever, period. As some of you may have heard, I wrote a letter last October to Donald Trump's lawyers defending the right of the New York Times to tell the story of two women who said they'd been groped by Mr. Trump years earlier. It was a particularly interesting experience for me. The Times decided to post the letter online. I was fine with that. I have spent my professional career fighting for greater transparency and greater openness. I believe in transparency and openness. But let me tell you, you don't know anything about transparency and openness until your employer posts your phone number and email address on the internet. Yes, that information was in the letterhead. Wow. My inbox exploded. The messages came pouring in. Overwhelmingly, they were supportive. Many were touching. Women wrote to talk about their own experience with sexual harassment and how they'd been silenced and how much it meant to them that the Times was telling the women's stories. But one of my favorite emails came from a retired lawyer in California. He said he had spent his entire career working for a movie studio, which meant that he had spent a lifetime writing polite responses to all the obnoxious jerks in that industry. You must be lucky, he said, to work at a company where they let you respond by saying what you really think and really believe. His email touched on a question that I was asked repeatedly. Did the senior management of the New York Times Company really let you write a letter like that? That would be a letter that not only said, please sue us, but also contained the somewhat less than lawyerly phrase, piece of ass. Okay. I have a glass office, and about 10 minutes after the letter went up, I found out that one of the not-so-great things about having a glass office, and that is you can see when the CEO of your company is walking towards your office with a certain look on his face and a certain letter in his hand. In that instance, you begin to wonder whether it was such a super hot idea to send a bring it on letter to the next president of the United States without first checking with senior management. Our CEO, Mark Thompson, is an Englishman. He walked right in and held the letter in front of me. He cut to the chase. Brilliant letter, he said, but there's one thing I'll never understand. Why do you Americans insist on capitalizing after a colon? AP style book. That could have gone much worse. Of course, the question I guess get asked most often these days is what to do. What to do when we have an administration that declares the working press to be the enemy of the American people, that thinks it's okay to exclude reporters it dislikes from press conferences, that bridles at the thought that reporters might actually believe that facts matter, an administration that longs for a country where journalists can go to jail for publishing the truth. If you are a journalist, the answer is simple. Keep doing what you are doing. For all the toxic noise coming out of the White House, yeah. For all that toxic noise coming out of the White House, I do not see journalists silencing themselves. I do not see journalists backing off. What I see is journalists asking the right questions, writing tough stories, doing what they have always done, helping the public understand what is being done in the name of the American people. Yeah. I have seen the polls. Only 32% of the American people answered yes when asked whether they trust the mass media, whatever the mass media means today. TMZ or the Financial Times, Fox News or MSNBC, NPR or RT, your local newspaper or Breitbart News. It's like this. Have you ever asked a 13-year-old boy, how was school today? There is only one respectable answer. It sucked. And it is the same deal here. Ask any self-respecting, freedom-loving, institution-hating American a big, stupid, unanswerable question about what they think of the mass media. Of course they're going to say, it sucks. So journalists need to ignore that sort of noise too and continue doing their good work. But they really don't need their lawyers to tell them that. What they do need is their lawyers and their editors and their publishers to continue to have their backs. In the aftermath of my letter to Trump's lawyer, I received an email from a man named Clarence Jones. Clarence Jones is 86 years old now, but in the early 1960s, he was Martin Luther King's personal lawyer. You may remember Times versus Sullivan, that groundbreaking First Amendment case, arose from an ad placed in the New York Times by Dr. King's supporters, and it told of the violence and abuse that civil rights protesters had endured in Montgomery, Alabama. Clarence Jones wrote to me in October to remind me that in 1964, when the Times and the Sulzberger family stood up for the newspaper, they were also standing up for the civil rights leaders who had published the ad. He was pleased to see we were still standing up for those who would otherwise be silenced. And that is the real point. When we stand up for freedom of the press, it's not just about standing up for news organizations and their journalism. It is about standing up for people who depend on us to give them the truth and to give them a voice. Much of the assault we see today on the press is not about changing the law or reinterpreting the First Amendment. It is a fight for the hearts and minds of the American public. It is a noxious campaign to create doubt in the public's mind about the role of the press in our democracy and to win support for an administration that wants to throw away the democratic norms and traditions that have been central to how the press and the government coexist with each other. That is a serious, serious problem. But we make a mistake if we frame that as a battle between left and right, painting conservatives as enemies of free expression and liberals as friends of the free press. In 2010, Congress passed the most significant libel law in its history, the U.S. Speech Act. It protects U.S. publishers from foreign libel judgments. The vote in the House was unanimous. The vote in the Senate was unanimous. Every Republican, every Democrat. And when Congress strengthened FOIA in 2007 and did it again in 2016, the vote was overwhelming and transcended party lines, bringing together Republicans and Democrats. We need to resurrect that American consensus. Times versus Sullivan doesn't just protect the New York Times. Breitbart News needs it as much as we do. They need it more, in fact. And no matter what our foreign policy is, we place ourselves in a better place in facing down dictators and raising the hopes of supporters of democracy abroad by being able to hold up the U.S. as a place where free expression is valued, protected, and encouraged, no matter who is speaking or what they are saying. Here is the message we need to get out right now. Freedom of the press is not a liberal value, it's an American value. And one last thing, I promise you, you can make that case in 140 characters and still have room to talk about just how bigly this great crowd was. Thank you.